back at what we've heard today is what are some of the fundamental shifts and some of the new rules and then the new requirements for us as communicators to look ahead and picture what our profession's going to be in 2020. So think ahead. 2020 is exactly 10 years and 2 months and 2 weeks from now. 10 years ago, the world looked very different. The internet was kind of something that, you know, we were getting used to. I remember Southwest was giving you 4 flight credits if you booked your flights on the internet, and if you were willing to take that risk, and I thought that was quite fun. I kept booking. I said, let me see, how many different segments could you book to get from Dallas to Los Angeles? And on Southwest, you got like 85 credits. It was just great, because you went in this kind of zigzag manner. Companies were just beginning to see what the power of this tool could be, but the stability and the control of our world was pretty fundamental and something we could count on. And so when we think about the fundamental changes that we have to absorb, the first one is perhaps the most important. Many of us grew up in a communication world that we could control. If you think back to everything we learned in school, it was all about creating the perfect sentence. How many of us have thought our purpose in life was to create the perfect sentence? Or to bring the touch of Hemingway to whatever we were trying to describe. But that craftsmanship as a writer drove many of us to do this work because we love the process and we love the experience. Perhaps we even love the solitude that being a craftsman that we can control provides. And so you think what we learned in school, it was all about how to create the perfect message, survive the imperfect editing process, and then release it in a way that could be controlled. And everything was about control. Everything we did with a designer was all about how do you control the visuals so the words stand out? How do you control the way people receive something? It was all about control. We have to give control up. We are in a world now that we cannot control. And to think about how our world has been tossed up and down, go back to the fundamental thing we learned in journalism school, which was the 5 W's and the H. And all we have to do to see how our world has changed is to think through the 5 W's and the H. So you think about the 5 W's and the H. Let's start with the H and then we're over the H. The H is how. Well, we were all about how. We were all about how we would create the message that you would ultimately get. The how today is we all create the message. We all participate in a conversation, and so that control we once experienced is no longer there. The who. We were all about a limited number of who's. We trained to be one of those limited number of who's who created the message. Now the message is created by anyone. The marvelous thing about Twitter is you can go on any time, day or night, and have this world of opinion of what's happening in the world. The day Michael Jackson died was fascinating because we had a choice. We could tune in on CNN and hear the conventional media tell us what people were experiencing, or we could go on Twitter and we could experience it. And that whole moving thing that of people, you know, who we don't know, telling us it had to be Thriller because of this. It had to be The Man in the Mirror because of this. And we shared this universal communal experience. So the who is much more broad and much more fair across the world. The what has completely changed. We grew up creating a fairly limited agenda of what? Any organization we worked for has had a fairly limited agenda of what? The what is completely broadened in this new world. When? We decided when people would be informed. I can remember in my first job as the head of employee communications 150 years ago that we determined when people would learn things. And we determined that mechanics could only learn once a month. But that pilots, seriously, this is frightening. There are certain boxes in your closet you should keep closed. And this was one. We determined that the mechanics could not absorb more than once a month because I guess They carry toolboxes. And then we determined that the pilots, however, because they're pilots, they had to be communicated with far more frequently than the flight attendants who, well, have to pay attention to the difference between Coca-Cola and Pepsi. So we had determined when people should receive information. And now to even consider that is almost humorous, because the when is completely open. And perhaps the biggest change is the why. In the past, our profession was all about, we will communicate when we have something to say. That gives us reason. Now our world is, we will have a conversation when we all have something to share. And so if the biggest change is one from control to a world in which we can only influence, that means that we have to move in our priority from a world of content to a world of conversation. If we have one thing we learn, or two things we learn, one of them has to be how we facilitate conversations in the organizations where we work or the organizations we work with. That ability to stage an event, to stage a conversation in such a way that people will want then to share about it in conversations of their own. That's the new art form that our profession is all about.